So what I was thinking to bring to the parents is this question of why do we have so many anxiety and depressions in adolescents and young adults. I just recently found out again, 1 in 4 in high school suffers under depression, 1 in 3 when they are at the university. That's frightening. And I pondered about that. And good evening.
Just get further away from you.
You may, because I'm on the verge.
Oh, being sick.
Sorry for being late.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
keep the
so
distance.
that's fine. We'll sit here.
So, and I ask myself, what is that? Of course, it is our time, for one thing. But the other thing is that when one looks at general education, the thinking is challenged, the will is challenged, as we are challenging it right now over there with the basketballers. And what about the middle sphere? And so that is one aspect where we really have to focus on. And you have all heard that because some of you are longer with us, even very long with us. You have thinking, you have feeling, you have also willing. I'm sure you have also many times heard head, heart, and hand. And so, yes, we want that our children learn how to think. I should say, actually, compared to my time at school, today they know how to think very quickly, but they need to learn more actually how to do things then. That has changed. When I remember my childhood, I had to learn how to think, but I knew how to do things with my hands. And today we have to really work on the children, not only to start 1,000 projects, but also to finish them. So that is where the willing comes in. And then, of course, here in the Western world, will foremost when you are middle school and high school is going into the ball games, no matter which ones you are wanting to talk about. And so what is with that middle sphere? And that, in most cases, is left completely alone. How can one educate the feeling life? That's where the psychiatrists come in, that's where the psychologists come in. This is where the many mind-altering drugs come in. Can one work on it in a way that can be to a high degree preventable? And so if you look at the Waldorf School curriculum, there are 2 aspects, foremost, that work with that theme, and that is the storytelling from early on, from kindergarten on all the way to 12th grade. And of course all the arts. Many times people think Waldorf schools are good because they are so artsy and the children learn all the arts. But actually why we use the arts, the auditory as well as the visual arts, is to balance out these 2 other poles. The intention is not that we have fantastic artists that graduate from 12th grade or 8th grade or whatever, but the arts are the helpers to keep the balance. And so what I'm planning to do with you today, maybe from kindergarten through grade school, this time and next time, that we look into the high school years, the 4 high school years, and how do we continue that there is a nourishment for the feeling life of the students. So that when they are meeting some bumps, particularly when they go into the university or college. There's always some change and difference. And so, how can one do that? At least supportively. And that is my plan for today. And if you have any questions, please let me know. So I first will go from kindergarten through 12th grade to bring some of the themes. I will not bring all the visual and the auditory arts, which also play a huge part for that reason. And then I will focus on these earlier years, and maybe I will tell you one or two stories. Who knows how far we will make it. So, who has children in the kindergarten here in this group? Preschool. There we go. And then grade school. Yeah. Well, you are seasoned parents back there already. So, kindergarten, already even in preschool, you tell the fairy tales. That goes also into first grade, and we will look into that. What do these stories mean? Not just we like to tell them, we like to hear them, but what stands behind all of these things, and why do we hold them so dear in our education? And then when they come into second grade, 8-year-old ones, the story theme is Fables and Legends. I see a nodding head because you went through it. The fables, we use the animals because in 8th grade, in 8-year-old ones, they wake up to the world around them much more than in their early years. And interesting gestures come in the mood of the children, and so we bring that in form of the fables. The sly fox, the greedy wolf, the innocent lamb, and so on. I'm sure all of you have heard some of Aesop's fables. And you bring that to the children as is, and talk about then afterwards. And at the same time, excuse me, we bring the legends of individuals who have accomplished these lower qualities of our nature to a much higher degree. And I always use not only the saint stories that are so familiar, like St. Francis and others, even though you can look into the class of which child has what name, but one can go, to my mind, all the way into the modern times when you think of Mahatma Gandhi and many others who have really lived a life that is way beyond most of our emotional capacities. And then we come into the third grade, where we have this so-called 9-year-old change, where the child, for the first time, really consciously see that I am here, the world is there, where they separate themselves out, many times very difficult for mothers, because the son and the daughter will not hug the parent in front of the school anymore. Stay back, I'm an individual now. And we go to the Old Testament, because you have incredible stories there where you can bring the picture. Just think of Jacob wrestling with the angel, saying, I will not let you go unless. this ego awareness that you have then in these stories. So that is the story lore, not in any aspect of religion view, but the story as stories as such. And then we come to the fourth grade. Third grade also is a year where the children do a lot of things with their hands. They have gardening, they have house building, they have weaving, they have clothes making, they have cooking, they have all these hands-on activities. And that goes quite well with the stories of the Old Testament, where they become much more conscious. And that is what we want to accompany. And what you see in this whole development, and we will go on with that we accompany the children with their individual development. We don't come up with certain ideas, and this is what you have to learn now, because we want to have you developed, but where is the child in his or her development, and how can we support it in their development with what we bring in the classroom? So that is a completely different viewpoint. Do I force them to learn something which, of course, in some ways they can, but is it healthy for them, and should they really grasp the most of it? Or do we observe where are they in their development, and what can I bring as a teacher in terms of the subject matter that supports their healthy growing up? And that is really what we try to do. Yeah, thank you for telling them to go, because some other people may come still.
Just because it's not.
Yeah, I know, but
Oh,
tell, the school is big enough, they can go somewhere else.
oh, I don't know.
Okay,
On the other side.
all right. So next, fourth grade. Mythology. We like to foremost look at the Norse mythologies, and I will bring them later on why. But at that time we also bring other mythologies. For instance, when we have house studies here in the West, that they hear mythologies from the Native Americans who used to live here. And one can easily bring of other places. And so that is the year where the story lore for the whole year will be the mythology foremost of the Norsemen. And then fifth grade, we go from story, as we say, to history. And we start with ancient India, the life of Krishna, of Buddha. Sorry, but I need to keep that in balance. Then we go to ancient Persia, the life of Zarathustra, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and in fifth grade we round it off with Greece, and there maybe I can also bring you one little picture of one of the mythologies of the Greeks, because that is so outstandingly clear. So, India, Persia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece. And so, again, from story to history, you can well see, can we really call it history when we bring the life of Krishna, or when we bring the life of Zarathustra? Yes, one can find certain traces there, but it still is kind of story quality, and the struggles and the accomplishments that these individuals had. And then Mesopotamia, of course, then for the first time, can you put your hands on something that can be called then history. Same with Egypt, it goes between story and history. Isis and Osiris are wonderful mythological pictures, but what the Egyptians did on the earth we can find. And likewise what we then find in Greece. There we bring the mythology, but we also then know the state of Athens and so on. And then we come to 6th grade. Rome, and further north I would like to bring also then King Arthur. And there you will find it changes very quickly if I would bring the life of Julius Caesar to the students, which we still call history. And then the next day we look as a class, so what were his accomplishments? What were his intentions? Were they positive? Were they negative? How were they influencing the society of Rome? Or we have some other emperors at that time who are by far not so pleasing, if I just would mention Nero. So what did he accomplish? What did he leave behind when he left the earth? So you can have already very good conversations with these 6th graders who love, by the way, to argue by that time. That's why they have Roman history. And what did the Romans do in the Senate? They argued, and that was a wonderful thing. And so you look at much more at the qualities of these individuals you now bring, and what their intentions were, what they had accomplished, and what was left behind. Which again, if you then would make a jump to the high school, 11th, 12th grade, where I then very openly speak not only how the world meets you, but what kind of footprints are you leaving behind? How does the world around you experience you? In the lower school, we do not talk about it. We look out there at other individuals where we can look at. For instance, then also, if we would compare a Nero to King Arthur and his effort to bring the positive qualities. 7th grade, the really waking up situation. You can bring the biographies of Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael. You can bring the life of Magellan, the first one who circumnavigated the whole earth, not he, but his people. He died in the Philippines. What kind of tension was on that boat, on these 5 boats? One made it back. Why was he so difficult to deal with? How do you think one could have done it differently? You see, that is, first of all, interesting to the students, much more than when I would ask them, what time was it? When did he land where? But what was the emotional struggle between those sailors? How did they meet the Philippines? Why did they go wild after he died? Getting lost in all these islands, like sea robbers, really. What happened? And of course, 7th grade also, when we look to the north, at that time we are in Europe, and you see this whole story goes with history from ancient Asia, finding its way further and further west, until we then come to America. So, 7th grade, the Renaissance in Florence foremost, the 3 great artists, when we look to the west, Spain and Portugal, the navigators, this incredible struggle to even get across the equator, because one has the idea the world is boiling there. And then to the north, the Reformation, whether you want to take Martin Luther, whether you want to take Zwingli, whether you want to take Wycliffe, one of those where they really have now this gesture of, this is the old form, but I will not follow it. My conscience does not allow it. As for instance, Martin Luther said when he was cited before the High Court with the emperor and the church representatives. And he knew that was his life. Here I stand, I cannot help it, but I will not obey. That's where the seventh graders are. And those of you who have or had seventh graders know what that means. And then with eighth grade, we go then full-fledged into revolutions. Again, biographies. Robespierre, Marat, and so on. What were ideas? Freedom, equality, and brotherhood. How were they executed? Not much came of it, and then you have a Napoleon who says, I will become emperor again. And so on. You can see these stories in the history. So that is the story, lore in the lower grades. Now I will go on with the 4 following years of the high school, and then we will focus foremost on these lower grades. So interestingly enough, in the 9th grade, the 9th graders are not that different from the 8th graders. We look again at revolutions. I could put it here. This time now, though, a little bit different. Not as we have it here with the biographies, but really then this view of what does it take to create a revolution. Where did we also have it? Maybe even some peaceful revolutions, but what did it involve? Where did it go? And again, one could bring Mahatma Gandhi, who also revolutionized his country, and that he finally accomplished that the British would leave, not with force, but with teaching his people to go and spin their clothes again and go collect the salt again. What happened with Nelson Mandela? How did he revolutionize? And so, again, conversations and discussions, I always then bring into these revolutions the 3 words that were shouted in the streets of Paris: equality, brotherhood, and freedom. Asking these 3 qualities, where do they fit to our social living together? Again, much more discussions on understanding where I would like to be. Equality, brotherhood, and freedom. Where would I like to have equality? Steiner said in the legal system. Freedom in the spiritual world. That means education and everything else. Religious beliefs, freedom. That leaves us, and that is the hard deal to understand, brotherhood with economy. And that's where we are stumbling over. So we can have conversations. What is that? Then we come to the 10th grade, where we look again at the old, ancient stories. The 10th graders always want to know where have we come from. And we have this story of ancient literature. Where we now look again at the story of Krishna or Zarathustra's teaching, what we find in Mesopotamia, the Book of the Dead in Egypt. And how do we compare them? Why are they different? How are they different? How can we see that? What is the language there? 11th grade, we have this wonderful part of Parsifal. Which is a story of a middle-aged knight who, in very brief terms, leaves his mother as a complete dullard and is determined to become a knight, which his mother did not want him to be, and makes one blunder after the other, plenty foolish steps. And then at one point when he thinks, I have accomplished everything I wanted, I have won every joust, I have the most beautiful wife, I have been invited to King Arthur's court. One messenger from the Grail Castle comes and says, if you think that you are so, now with my words, teenage words, if you think that you are so cool, look at yourself. You missed sorely. And he then goes through the phase of doubt. And it takes him years to understand, again, what I have created as footprints on the earth has met me now, and I have to say, I don't like it, but it is me. And it takes him a long time again to realize what I have sown, I now have to harvest in my personal life. And the last one to bring it a crowning is Goethe's Faust. In 12th grade, which is this Dr. Faust did live actually, indeed, in the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance, as a professor in Heidelberg. And he is one of those where the 12th graders are exactly there, who want to understand the world, and if the world doesn't reveal herself to me as I want it, I am even willing to make a pact with the counterforce, with the evil, with Mephisto. And he does. And in his whole journey through that, he understands the evil, and at first he follows the evil, but in the second part, he knows the evil so well that he can say, this is what you need to do for me now. Again, discussions possible with the students just before they then leave. So that is, in large, the story core. Questions before I then go on? Or thoughts? All right, then we So what is it with these fairy tales? I will go back now to what we started out with here. We hear so often that these fairy tales, particularly the Russian and the Grimm's fairy tales, I should add also the French, are so cruel. Just think of Snow White. The wicked queen has to put hot iron shoes on her feet and dance until she dies. And I know full well that here in America, Walt Disney managed to change that drastically. But what do we do? So I would like to bring you an image. First of all, where do these fairy tales come from? And then what they stand for. So the fairy tales, we do not have an author, unless you go to Andersen's and others, which were man-made, but I am looking at those ancient fairy tales where one has no idea where they came from. One probably has to assume that they were growing out of the mystery places and that they were told from parent to child, from parent to child, until in the 19th century finally people walked around and collected them. Same as we have it actually with the mythologies. And so the fairy tales, to begin with, I would like to say, whether we speak of the beautiful princess, whether we speak of the noble knight or king, those are all qualities within the individual soul. So if I would look at Snow White and the 7 lovely dwarfs and the wicked witch, there we have a beautiful picture of how one finds one's way into the earth, onto the earth. So if you think of a little child, totally innocent, open to all, and with Snow White it's very interesting that the number 7 comes up all the time. She is 7 years old, changing of teeth. When one takes these first steps towards the world, and the old world died, Mother had died. And we have these 3 qualities, so white as snow, so red as blood, so dark as ebony. There you have these qualities in a picture form of thinking, feeling, and willing, or thinking, feeling, and doing. And then comes this stepmother in, this earthly quality that we probably all have experienced, that we not only have noble feelings in ourselves, but we also have these negative feelings in ourselves. Envy, pride, I could go on, but in Snow White it is this quality that when one becomes ever more engaged in the physical world, then these negative qualities come also up and play a role. And so Snow White then has to go because there is this mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most fairest of us all. That is this higher consciousness that we all have. We just don't always want to know it. And my higher consciousness is always honest with me. It's that mirror that tells me. And in this case, the mirror says, you are fair, but Snow White, your higher, better being is much fairer than you. You have become a little bit ambitious here. And so she is sent out, and then still Snow White is not so far on the earth as we would find it, for instance, with Little Red Riding Hood. She has a communication with the dwarfs. She goes over 7 mountains to the 7 dwarfs. And we know, for instance, that the 7 we find also in the cosmos with the planets. And there she stays and nibbles of each one of them, falls asleep. So she is still awake with the elementals, stays there. But then this other part comes in. First, the belt that is tight, then the comb, and then the piece of apple that is stuck in her throat. And then, after a long time, the prince comes, the higher self. After one has really suffered a long time. And interesting enough, it is said that one of the servants stumbled over a bush, tripped. So it isn't happening on its own, the tripping happened. And the core of the apple comes out. And so she gets married and invites the wicked queen. And the question is, if I keep the wicked queen alive in myself, what do I allow the children to feel? Or is there the story that the wicked queen in myself has been overcome? This envy and pride, I have overcome it. I have burned it out. And so if you understand the story and then bring it to the children in that way, then they don't feel that it's gruesome unless the parents say, isn't it awful? Just as a matter of fact. And what my experience has been over and again is like, the evil has been overcome. I can tell you one story out of my family, actually. My second child was a splendid rascal who kept me on my toes always. And one evening, mother was too tired and said, you know, if you don't get into your pajamas and brush your teeth in a very short while, I will not tell you a story. And that fellow stood in front of me and said, Mom, that you cannot do. I said, yes, I can. No, because then I have bad dreams. You cannot do that to me. And that told me a lot. So if I would tell them in the evening one of these fairy tales, then all was settled and all was fine, and we could sleep. So I would like to tell you another lovely fairy tale and just tell you the tale, and maybe we can look at that afterwards, what it might mean. Long, long ago, there was a king and a queen, and they lived happily together. But there was one thing they really longed for, and it never happened. They wanted to have a child. And after a long, long time, the queen was expecting, and they were so happy. But when the child was born, lo and behold, it was a little donkey. The queen said, that is not for me. Let's take it to the river and drown it. But the king said, oh no. We wanted a child. This is our child. And this will be our child. And when he is grown up, then he will be successor to my throne. So the little donkey grew up nicely, and his ears grew beautifully tall. And one day a minstrel came to the castle and played the lute, and the donkey said, that is what I want to learn. But the minstrel said, donkey, how do you want to play the lute? You will tear up the strings. No, I will learn the flute. donkey said. And he insisted on it. And he learned to play the lute very beautifully. And so he was very happy. One day he came to a big lake where the wind had stayed away and the water was all clear. And the little donkey looked into the water, and there he saw that he was quite different with his beautiful tall ears. And he was very sad. And he said, I cannot stay in that kingdom anymore. I will take my best friend, my lute, and will journey out into the world. And that he did. And he traveled and traveled until he came into another kingdom. And there he knocked at the gate and said, let me in. But the guard said, what do you want here? I want to come to the king. To the king? A donkey? No way. So the donkey took his lute and played it beautifully. And the guard listened to it and looked and said, I've never seen anything like this. So he went to the king and told the king, there is a donkey in front of the gate and he can play the lute beautifully. Let him in, said the king. And the donkey played his lute for the king, and the king was deeply moved. And the king said, would you like go in the kitchen and eat with our kitchen folk? Oh no, the donkey said, that is not for me, I'm something better. Oh really? Do you want to go and eat with the soldiers? Oh no, I am something better. Would you like to eat at my table with me? Yes, that I would like to do. Now the king had a beautiful daughter. And the donkey looked at her and really liked her. And the king said, would you like to sit next to my daughter at table? Yes, I really like that. So this is how time went on. Donkey played his lute and was very happy. But after a time he became quite sad. And the king saw that his head drooped down deeper and deeper. And the king one day said, what is it with you, my donkey? You are getting so sad. Would you like some gold from me instead? Oh, I don't need gold. Would you like some precious stones? I don't want precious stones. Would you like half my kingdom? I don't want your half kingdom. No. Would you like my daughter as wife? Yes, that I would love to have. And so they got married. The first night, the king was worried, and he sent his servant into the chamber to watch that the donkey would behave nicely. And the next morning, when the servant came out, the king wanted to know how was the night. Oh, the servant said, you should come tonight and be there. That donkey shed his skin, and it's the most beautiful, handsome prince. And he puts his donkey skin next to the bed. And if I were you, king, I would take that donkey skin and burn it. When the daughter came and the king asked, so my dear child, are you distraught that you are married to a donkey? She said, oh no, father, I love him more than anything else. And so the king the next night hid behind the curtains, and indeed the donkey shed his skin. And when he was sound asleep, the king took the skin and made a big bonfire outside and burned it all up. The next morning, when the prince found out that his donkey skin was gone, he was first shocked and said, now I have to leave. And the king said, why? We love you just as much as you are now. You can be the way you are. And from now on, they lived happily together, and he got half the kingdom while the king was still alive, and he got the whole kingdom when the old king died, and they lived happily thereafter. So that is, for instance, a little story that one can bring very early in kindergarten. But what stands behind there?
Being true to oneself.
Being true to oneself, yes. And the old kingdom, one could also imagine, was the old world where people were still very clairvoyant. But are we not all carrying our donkey around? There's a nice African-American song. Me donkey talk, me donkey walk, me donkey eat with a knife and fork. Tingaleo, come little donkey, come. Tingaleo, come little donkey, come. So the donkey has always had this picture of stubborn on the one hand, but also very willing to serve. And what can change this old donkey? It is music. The music really then can change and transform. And that is what we have in this little innocent story, that the donkey learns to play the lute so beautifully that with that he overcomes his old donkey and his higher qualities come to the fore, the prince, who then can get married to the beautiful soul, because the prince is always the higher self of the human being. The princess is always the human soul. And when they are in harmony together, then you have in these fairy tales a wedding. So that is one little peek into fairy tales, and of course one could have many evenings just on fairy tales and see what they tell. Questions? Yes.
Now that you explained about the messages behind the fairy tales, I had wondered about, when my daughter decides that, all of my playtime is going to go towards the prince and the princess, and they meet and they love each other right away, and I'm wondering if is that okay for her at this time to think of that?
Yeah, that's fine.
She's still quite little, and
Yeah,
that's all we play right now. Yes,
That's fine.
all we play.
that's the story.
Mhm.
So no, I don't see any problem with that. You have that almost in each of these stories, where at the end all is in harmony and the princess and the prince come together. Sometimes it is the prince that has to struggle more, sometimes it's the princess that has to struggle more. When you think of some of the stories where she cannot wait to ask and asks a day too early and the prince has to leave, and she now has to wander for endless many years and walk iron shoes through until she finally finds him again. Those are all these challenges that we actually find here on the physical earth with our soul development and our higher self. And when does that come together? That's when the marriage happens. Yes?
I have two things. So when I was listening to the donkey story, I was thinking that's, like acceptance and being different and tolerance. And I was like, oh my God, okay, so if he burns the fur, he maybe gets mad and things like, hey, that means you don't accept me the way I was. So, you can interpret the story in a different way. So that is one thing. The other thing is, I've read many of these Grimm stories, but I've never looked at them the way you're explaining them. And I thought, not as little as kindergarten, maybe a little older, but I thought like, always the girls have to wait that some prince come and help them out of this, and this is kind of sexistic. That it was, and so, and then now if you look at some of the newer Walt Disney or whatever they are, Pixar, that the girls are doing actually, they're helping themselves and they're kind of getting themselves out, or they're tough enough and rough enough, they can ride horses and, do all kind of stuff. So what are we doing with those? I mean, those,
When you bring these fairy tales to the children, I would say you can start with 4 years old up to 7, 8. Not with the adult observations, they will not ask these questions. But if you had prematurely politicized your child from early on, then the open mind is not there anymore. Because both of these points you bring are political issues we are dealing with today. And it is very interesting how long you can tell fairy tales and then you can tell them again. So, end of first grade, you tell fairy tales. If I would tell a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old a fairy tale, they would say, "Are you kidding? Give me something real." The interesting thing is when they come into 12th grade, more than not have I been asked, "Mrs. Jaehnig, could we have a block on fairy tales, please? We so would love that." And a couple of times we could squeeze it in, and I had them in a track class on fairy tales, 12th grade. Those were the most wonderful times, where we now not just told the fairy tale, but looked at them and saw what was in it. But I, as a teacher, in order to tell the story truthfully, have to do my homework. And that, I would say, is probably with this whole curriculum. If I just tell it and say, "Oh, it's in the curriculum, I got to do it," it does not land where you would like it to land. Yes, there's one, and then there.
I was listening to the donkey story and thinking of the sort of the negative baggage that I bring with myself and letting it go.
Yeah.
And that release, and I have one child especially who I wish for that to happen more and more, and for him to believe in the possibility of it. I don't want to tell him the story and then spell out, "Oh, look, this is a negative,"
No.
Exactly. But I'm wondering if there are more materials for me to read that would help me tell the story so he sees it for himself when it's right.
They feel it. They don't see it, but they feel it.
Okay.
It goes here, as we started out with. It goes right here. Once upon a time there was. That's the same with all of these stories. We don't analyze until we come here. That's when you can start and look at and say, so how can one understand that?
Yeah.
Why is the life of Krishna so different to Zarathustra? So different to Gilgamesh and Enkidu? So different to Isis and Osiris? What stands behind there? But
Yeah. No, my mother always told me exactly what you're talking about. Oh, that's so sexist or whatever. So I know how that can work through listening.
yeah,
But yeah.
so that is a beautiful example. The baggage that we carry with us, and some children feel it very heavily. And then that story of the donkey can be almost relieving because it's gone, it's burned away, and I can really show my true self. You have to bring everything into, all of these qualities into me as a human being, into yourself. You do have a king and a queen, a princess. You may also have some negative qualities. So if I would go to Little Red Riding Hood, for instance, which is already much more earthy than Snow White, with her red cap, eager to see what's in the world, the senses are awake. She sees the flowers in the garden, picks them all, meets the wolf. But the wolf is greed in the mythological pictures. And what do we have there? She ends up in the wolf's belly, in the greed. And it's not the prince that that takes the coffin, the glass coffin, there one can see the beauty. It's the hunter with the scissors who divides and sees what's going on. Much more earthy, much more here. If we would go to Rose Red, or what is it called, the Sleeping Beauty, that's even more heavenly, up in the tower, surrounded by thorns, and then after 100 years they become roses. That's when the prince can come and give her a kiss when she wakes up. So, it's here. And when you have taken that transition, then you also can understand why the negative parts need to be overcome. Or going through a forest, which Snow White does. And very interesting, there is this line, if I may jump back and forth now in these fairy tales, that the wild animals did not attack her, they passed her. That means these emotional feelings in a 7-year-old were not that developed yet. They passed her. But she could still meet the elementals and find her housey, the little dwarf house. And what do children love to play when they are little? House. Under the table with a cloth over it, house. Finding my house. So just a few peeks into it. Now, Fables and Legends, I think we know those better than many others. I would like to, one, and I mentioned that before, Old Testament, whereas separating out of this much more cosmic feeling of the little child comes when Jacob comes back from Mesopotamia and meets the angel at dawn. He meets him twice, one at dusk and once at dawn. One at dusk is when the ladders are there, at dawn it's where the angel is wrestling with him. And the angel says, I need to leave, because this dawn and dusk is this moment when we are dreaming, not fully awake, not fully asleep, this in-between quality. There it is, where he wrestles with this angel and he says, you need to let me go. And he says, no, unless you bless me. And he holds on. This resistance, unless you bless me, I will not let you go. And then Jacob is called Israel. And so then he lets him go. But this, you see this 9-year-old change, this separating out. I will not just happily dance along. Which brings me to something else. We know that the children up to 7 in the preschool kindergarten love to imitate. They do what is around them in the world. If they have an older sibling, then they happily follow that older sibling. And the older sibling is the leader and the little one follows. And often the older sibling is kind of annoyed about that, because once in a while they would like to, one here it is. Or if there is just one child, it's following the adult world. We have that very clearly in the kindergartens also. When we come into the grade school, there is a switch. And that is that we now have authority, insightful authority, I should say, where the children are told what to do, because hopefully always with the feeling my teacher knows best what is good for me. And you as a teacher have to definitely also work with that. And really question daily, who is this child? Where is this child in his or her development? And how do I need to meet this child so that that child can take the next developmental stage in his or her life? And so, with the 9-year-old, that is very, very strongly so. That you have to be the insightful authority, because now these negative soul forces become ever more wakeful, and emotions develop. And again, I don't know whether you have adolescent children, any of you, but if you do, and you have always given in to your child, then it will be a very negative experience for all, because that adolescent child will just burst against everything. And you very calmly then have to actually say, without getting excited, this is what we do here, this is what we don't do here. Discussion finished. And so in this Old Testament, you find many of these stories. You don't need to go through the whole thing, you pick the stories as you want for your child or for your class, by feeling or seeing what they need to hear right now. Now I would like to go to 4th grade mythology. And there is this wonderful picture of these Norse myths. Maybe I can bring 2. There is this ash tree Yggdrasil. Fantastic names, that's after all Nordic. And we only know those because on Iceland they have been reserved for the longest time. So this ash tree Yggdrasil, first of all, the ash tree is a bisexual tree. It doesn't have a male and a female, it is both. Very interesting. And this ash tree is described that it stands between earth and the heavens. In the top of the ash tree, there is an eagle. On the branches, there are 4 deer that constantly eat. There are the roots down below where Nidhogg is gnawing. Nidhogg is a hog. And between these roots sit the 3 Norns. And then there is one little rascal, a Ratatosk, the squirrel, that constantly runs up and down and brings the messages from up top all the way down to the bottom and back up again. And so what do we have there? It's the picture of the human being. Here we have the eagle, the falcon, or the eagle, watching out. What is there? My senses are constantly out in the world, and we know when we have been overstimulated with our senses, it feels like having been gnawed off, one needs to go and sleep then. The nerves is the little squirrel that goes from top to bottom and bottom to top, and always tells everybody what's going on where. And Nidhogg is the digestive system that just constantly is working down there. And the 3 Norns, we do know from other stories, those are the ones who spin the thread, who keep the thread, and the one who cuts the thread. The beginning of life, the duration of life, the end of life. And in that picture you will see so beautifully that you can bring the whole human being in this image to 4th graders without telling what stands behind it, of course. And this whole mythology is full with these powerful images that tell the story of how mankind finds its way on the earth. I would like to bring yet another little piece. I mean, you can spread that out through the whole fourth grade. There is Odin and Thor. Those are the two. Odin is the oldest, the wise one. It says that Odin was the god who gave humans the breath, the speech, and to learn how to write the runes. And he made sacrifices for it. Thor is the younger god, willful, ego. The ego of the human being is the youngest of our members of our being. And he is with the heartbeat. He has his hammer. Got a little bit too short because Loki was part of that deal, as you may remember. But when Thor throws his hammer, it always comes back to his hand. It's like the heartbeat. But there is also the story of Ragnarok, the days when the gods will die. And there is, I need to bring a couple of more of these gods. Balder, the fair, the beautiful one, the life forces of the earth, of the growth of the plants. And Balder is loved by everyone and all, but the story says that one day Balder will die and one doesn't quite know when and how. And so his mother Frigga goes through all of nature and asks every plant and stone whether they would like to hurt Balder. And all say, no, we do not want to hurt Balder. There is also Loki, the rascal, the clever one, who has always plenty of ideas. And in fourth grade, you, I'm sure, always have a Loki in your class. And Loki one day disappears. Completely, he disappears ever so often. And he gets together with a giantess, Angerboda, Anger, angry, Angerboda, and together they have 3 children. They have the Fenris wolf, they have the Midgard serpent, and they have Hail. Yeah. Loki, Angerboda. And the Fenris wolf is the one who grows all the time when human beings use the words in a lie and in a wrong way. That's Fenris wolf's food. The Midgard serpent eats and grows with all the emotions, negative emotions humans have, like envy, hate, greed. That is her food. So much so that she can middle garden, that she goes all around the world. And Hail is the sister to those two, and she is sickness and death. And the gods know that when Fenris wolf and Midgard serpent become ever bigger, then illness and death also come into the world. And at one point, the battle will be between the good gods and these beasts. And that then is the so-called Ragnarok. And it is the Fenris wolf and Odin, the one who gave the word to humans and the writing to humans, knowing that in the future he will have to battle that beast. And Thor, the upright ego, has to battle the Midgard serpent. And that is then when they destroy each other, Odin dies from Fenris wolf, but the Fenris wolf also doesn't survive. Nor does the Midgard serpent. Thor kills her, but she kills him too. And Hel continues to be. And so what I tell you here, of course, you do not tell the children. You tell just these enormous stories. And now you find also Loki, and that I need to bring, that happens before this Ragnarok, is that now Baldur the Fair stands in the middle of the god garden, and the gods throw twigs and pieces at him, and it doesn't hurt him. And Loki, the clever one, comes in and asks Baldur's mother Frigga, so what are you playing here? Oh, they are having a good time with Baldur because whatever we throw at him, nothing can hurt him. And Loki says, did you also ask the mistletoe? Oh, Frigga says, no, I didn't ask the mistletoe because that is such a child, it has not even roots on the earth, it only grows in the trees. And Loki goes and takes a piece of the mistletoe, makes an arrow out of it, and Baldur, the light one, has a brother, Hodur, who is blind, as we all are. We are not seeing these elements anymore. And Loki goes to Hodur and says, Hodur, why are you not playing the game of the others? And Hodur says, I don't see. And Loki says, I can help you. And he gives him that mistletoe, and with Loki's help, Hodur shoots at his brother, and Baldur dies. And he goes into the underworld. And normally when you come to that moment in the class, they are very furious. My grandson in 4th grade said, why did they kick Loki not out of that Asgard? He had no business there. Well, you know, we have not only good beings in the spiritual world. Yeah, but he did. It's all right. So anyways, that is this moment when, again, this picture, when we as human beings are so earthbound that we do not see the life forces of the world, of the plant life, and everything. And that is just simply taught here in these enormous pictures, which again is food for their growing up, for how then the wolf can grow, and what he fights with, and so on and so on. It is thick and full, and also with lots of humor. Those of you who had 4th grade children know that Thor, the strong ego, needs to dress up as a lady because he needs to get married to a giant in order to get his lost hammer back. The big joy of the children when powerful Thor has to get into princess clothes. And then Loki, of course, has to go with him, and Thor is a hungry ego, and he eats well, and the giant says, well, I'm really impressed how Freya, the goddess, can eat. And Loki said, oh, she was so excited to meet you that she couldn't eat for weeks. And he drinks a whole huge horn of meat, and the giant is amazed. Loki said, oh, couldn't drink because she was so excited. And then the giant lifts the veil of the face and sees his fiery eyes of Thor and says, ooh. And Loki said, she is so excited to be finally your bride. So go bring that hammer. And of course the whole situation ends very differently. And Thor, the moment he has his hammer in hand, the princess clothes don't do any good anymore. All right, that is fourth grade mythology, just one little glimpse again. And I would like to still go to Greece and give you one story where we can see so beautifully how this view of the human beings conquering consciously the world more and better is just right there in front of our eyes if we understand it. And that is the story of Perseus and Medusa. Perseus is sent to Medusa the Gorgon, a very old being. And her hair are snake hair. And the story has it that whoever looks at Medusa will turn to stone. So Perseus is beloved by Athena, the goddess of thinking and war, but mostly I should say war in terms of words. And so Athena knows that he has to go and bring the head back of Medusa, and she gives him her shield and a sack. And she tells him, when you come close to Medusa, don't look at her directly, look into the shield, reflect. And when you see that she is sleeping, then lop off her head and put it in a bag. He gets some other gifts from Hermes, that's not so essential now. So he takes the shield from from Athena, the goddess of thinking, with a bag, and goes and does exactly what she tells him to do, Athena, and he lops off Medusa's head and puts it in the bag. He then has some other journeys, I don't want to go there right now, and he comes back and brings the head in the bag back to the king. And the king, of course, wants to see it, and becomes stone, and Perseus becomes king. So what does that story stand for? When you look at the human head inside, how does it look? Like snakes. And so there is this picture that the Grecians, really towards this Asian clairvoyant dream world, really wanted to push back. They also did that in other ways, the Persian War and so on. But that picture of the Medusa now in the head, captured, with Athena giving him the shield to reflect. And we even in the English language have the word, what do we do when we want to think about something once more? We want to reflect upon it. And what does that mean? I step back and look at it from a distance. If I'm still involved in it, I cannot reflect on it. If I want to reflect on it, I have to step back and look at it. When you had an exciting experience, negative or positive, and you are in it still completely, you cannot reflect yet. You can reflect when you step back and can look at it. And in this image of the Medusa, you have that right there. And again, I would tell that to fifth graders, of course with the beginning of the king and who wanted him and why, and that he gets his princess also and so on. But this shield of the goddess of thinking, now I begin to think and not just dream in the world. I can reflect. And then Medusa does not make me paralyzed, so to speak. I use my thinking force. If I look in 10th grade then, at ancient literature, I may bring that picture once more, and I could say, can you remember what you heard in 5th grade? Now let's look what that meant actually. Then we can look at it and understand it. In the lower school, we only bring the images. And that speaks then to the children here. And that brings me then to the end. Can you see what it does to the children if we do take time to bring them these stories that we do find overabundantly in the world? Fairy tales, mythologies, fables, you name it. It is not an academic class. I cannot test the children, so how much do you learn from that? But it is food for this middle part, of which where I started out with, that is also nourished according to their age, that they can ponder about and have these feelings, and not before they come into the high school can we then look and see, oh, I get it, I see. And I am convinced that with these stories, if the children have the possibility to grow up with from early on, that this middle sphere that is so in the education left behind and alone, that can really be very helpful to be more solid in themselves when they have to encounter difficulties in their life. Aside from all the arts, as I mentioned at the beginning. So that is what I wanted to bring today, and after the February break we look a bit more into the high school, particularly Perseus and Faust. Are there still questions? We still have 4 minutes left. Yes?
I was just wondering, in the grade school ages, are these stories being verbally told to them, or are they?
Oh, yeah.
It's all verbal.
Absolutely. You know, I can bring 2 examples for that question. Some years back one found out children, little children, only learn to speak the gift of Odin if they hear live language. So TV and tapes don't do the job. It's just noise for the child. And so there was actually some years back in Boulder, somebody clever developed a machine that was put into the child's pocket that would test how many minutes or hours the child would be exposed to live language. When the parents could check in the evening, oh, today we haven't spoken enough in the neighborhood of the child, lying in the cradle. So if you want that your child learns the beauty of the language, human language, live speech, everything else only goes with noise. That is one thing. The other thing, which I realized when I had my first class, and then I told parents always, please do not look at the movies of Alexander, Moses, whatever, because I want to bring it to them. And if they have seen the movies before, probably for instance Snow White, the typical Walt Disney nightmare, in my opinion. When they hear alone the word, for instance with Alexander, that he stood next to his father and this beautiful horse, black horse, came there, which he then called Bucephalus. Encephalus is of course the head. Immediately the pictures of the movie came up in the children's minds. And I tested that on myself. I read Dr. Zhivago when I was a teenager, Boris Pasternak, one of those big Russian books. And I had all of this inner imagination of the Siberian winter and the wolves howling and the dacha and the whole mix. And then I came to America and friends said, oh, that movie is out and it's so beautiful. Have you seen it? No, I haven't seen it. You should come. Ever since, when I think of Dr. Zhivago, it's the movie pictures that come into my mind and not my own inner imagination. So what we do if we give those images to the children with the movies, we prevent them of making their own inner imaginations. We deprive them, we cheat them in a certain way. Whereas if we allow them to have their own imaginations when they hear the spoken word, then they can form these imaginations. You can test it yourself. You may read a book. Many of these books are in movies. How was your own imagination when you go to the movie? Boom, or the other way around, and you cannot even form it really. So, definitely yes. Spoken word, live word, and then of course we draw the pictures, we write a sentence or two about all of these stories depending on what age they are in, so that it is digested and that they can express themselves in their own imagination on their own pictures. That's important. Kindergarten, preschool, let them do as they please. That's where imitation is. First grade beginning, I would like to see that you start, and then we go this, and then we do that. It becomes a little different. That's when the guidance comes in.
I was wondering with the fairy tales, there are so many books about these traditional fairy tales, and they obviously have pictures in the books as well. So is it the same as like watching a movie? They don't come up with their own imaginations of the story?
Yeah,
if they see the pictures in the book?
That's not as intense as a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you take like modern variants of some Grimm's fairy tales as being,
That is a good question. I checked several, and I would look to the ones that have the simplest language. The English language is so complex, and you can have a fairy tale told with lots of Latin and French words, which the little children have no relationship to it. And other translations avoid that and bring more the Anglo-Saxon qualities in it, which is the more normal language they use. So that one can check and look. I mean, if you really want to go into the trickiness of the English language, read a legal document and you have to have the dictionary right next to you in order to understand anything. So we can, yeah, that's a very good question.
I'm sorry, I'm wondering, I love how thoughtfully everything's laid out according to the development of the child. But I mean, at home, we're religious, we read the Old Testament stories, I love art, so when we go to the museums, I tell them the classical stories. That's, okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah. It's not like skipping ahead and something.
No, that's completely different than when you hear it, you remember it, maybe you even act it out, you draw a picture, you write something with it.
Yeah.
No. Excuse me. That's great. It gives the children much more life than putting them in front of the TV. All right, dear friends, if you want to hear more what's going on in the high school, then you are more than welcome next time we get together here. Thank you for coming.